This is an extract from Waiting for Lindsay, which was my first novel, originally published by Hodder way back in 1999 and just reissued by Sandstone Press. This is from the second part of the novel, Spring. Tom is a bookseller. He has a second-hand bookshop in a small village in the Highlands of Scotland. But he's also, he hopes, still a poet of sorts. Tom had had a good line in his head all day, a strong 10-syllable line. When it had come to him, as he mashed up dog food for Bracken, whose jaws were weaker and teeth fewer these days, his heart had leapt at its perfection, and he'd risen giddy, seeing red, hearing the line, rhythmic and sure. Where are you going, he'd asked it, listening for the next line, for a clue about what the poem would say. It was late afternoon now, and he was at the table in the front shop, piles of books on either side, checking invoices. The line was still alone. It had nothing to go with it but a phrase, a fragment. There was no poem. The line itself seemed less strong now, less a powerful beginning than an idea stranded in an open space. The bookshop was empty. There would be children in after school and 1 or 2 teachers, but at 2:30 on a March day, when the rain hadn't stopped since 10 o'clock, and the wind blew in gusts down the street, seeking out cracks to whistle draughts through, there was no one. Tom was alone, his father having stayed at home after lunch, as he usually did. He snapped shut the metal fastener in the ring binder, closed it, and put it on a shelf in the back shop. He switched on the electric kettle to make himself tea. It was warmer in the back room, and smelt of dog, since Bracken had lain in front of the 2-bar electric fire all morning before going home with Stuart at lunchtime. Tom got his pad out and sat at the table here, knowing the bell would ring if anyone came into the shop. Every time he wrote, he marked the date at the top of the page in tiny Roman numerals, an affectation left over from school. He put his glasses on to peer at the last page, where 6 lines reproached him, shapeless and unfinished. The light in here was not so good. He switched on the study lamp, which didn't help much. The date sprang out clearly, too clearly. He'd written nothing since before Christmas. Resigned, he turned the page, looked at blank paper, wrote his good line, and a little further down the page, his fragment. The clock ticked. The electric fire heated the backs of his legs, and rain spattered on the window that looked onto the yard, with its dustbins and stone wall. Then he caught sight of the Scotsman lying on a chair where his father had left it in the morning, folded back at an article on seasonal affective disorder, explaining how this would come to an end for many people depressed by lack of sunlight when the hour changed at the weekend. The hour will change, and daylight will come again, he thought, then said aloud with 1 syllable less, the hour will change, and daylight come again. 20 minutes later, the bell rang on the shop door, and he looked up like a man roused from sleep. He shook himself back to here and now, and the sound of footsteps. As he got up, someone came through. Meg, he said. She wore a long raincoat with the collar turned up, and her half-closed umbrella dripped water on the piece of thin carpet between table and door. Hi. He took the umbrella from her and stuck it in the wastepaper basket, then unbuttoned her coat so that he could slip his arms round her, feeling her thin, straight back under his hands beneath lambswool jersey and cotton shirt. She stood still, submitting to this, and leaned her head on his chest. Then she drew back. Tom, the house is soaked. His arms slipped away, letting her go. When? This morning. The offer was accepted this morning. They want to move in 4 weeks. She was looking at him anxiously, but he turned to the shelf with the kettle and mugs. I'll make tea, he said. I put the kettle on earlier, but I forgot to make any. I would have told you, she said. Only we've had so many false starts with this selling business, you know. So, he said, with his back to her, swilling hot water in the brown pot he and his father had used almost entirely unwashed for years. It was thick with tannin. You hardly need a tea bag in that, Annie had said once, visiting the shop. So, you'll be away in 4 weeks? Well, the boys are home at Easter, so I hope by then we'll have a rented place. Till we find a house. No more travelling for Keith, then? That's right. He turned and handed her a mug of tea. She held it carefully, but did not drink from it. Eventually, as he talked, She set it down on the table next to his poem, which she didn't notice. I suppose it had to happen sometime, he said. Yes. She looked tired, the tiny lines at the corners of her eyes more noticeable than usual, the skin white around her mouth, which was pulled tight. It's a good thing, he went on. Time it was sorted out. Oh yes, her voice was faint. I have to try anyway. It might be better when we're together all the time again. I'm sure it will. Tom? It's all right. I'm all right. Want a biscuit? Tom? She was flushed with the heat from the fire, almost girlish in the lamplight as she moved towards him, but he brushed her aside. Off you go, he said. Home. You must have plenty to do if you're moving in 4 weeks. I will see you, though. Is there any point? He smiled at her, softening this. Surely. Off you go, he said again, brisk, giving her no arm. The shop bell clanged. She whirled round, went out quickly, forgetting her umbrella. As she turned, the end of her coat belt flew out and caught the edge of a tottering heap of letters and publishers' catalogues. They slipped sideways, knocking over the mug of tea. But he'd followed her into the shop, and it was only later, when his customer, Mrs. McLeod from the post office for a Catherine Cookson and a birthday card, had gone, that he went back and discovered a pool of brown tea had obliterated his poem.